Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another study of a Torah portion lessons. This week we studied the portion of Vayeira. I want to begin with a current event and see how it can tie to this week's portion. So just in the last couple of weeks, about 3 weeks ago, they announced the Nobel Prize winners. Among the Nobel Prize candidates, there are at least three Jewish recipients, and they are the ones that I found: Louise Gluck for literature, Roger Penrose for physics, and Paul Milgram for economics, and Harvey Alter for medicine. So it's actually four winners of a Nobel Prize. This is extremely fascinating, even though you must have heard it before. I just want to show with you the numbers so it shouldn't be very boring. Right now, the population of the Jewish people in the universe is 0.2%, less than 0.2%. The percentage of Nobel Prize winners of Jewish people is 23%, a staggering number. Until this very day, the total of Nobel Prize winners are 930. 930 till this day have received the prize. From them, from 930, 208 are Jewish recipients. This is a totally out of proportion number by comparing to any other segment of society. No matter how you break it, no other group or country or society comes even close to that number, 23%, almost a quarter. This is more fascinating, especially taking into account that we just faced the Holocaust not long ago, where 6 million of us were perished. There is definitely a very high number of great minds that perished during the Holocaust, and yet the numbers still are so great. People are asking, whenever this time around, people keep asking, what's the secret of the Jewish people? What makes the Jewish people so successful that they have such a high number? Some say is because we have a higher IQ. We're much wiser. That's why in South Korea, the Talmud is a bestseller. They figure that Talmud is the source of great wisdom for the Jewish people, and they want to also acquire some of that wisdom. However, somebody asked me that the Chinese people also, they love and they invest in studying and acquiring wisdom, and yet they are not as close in the numbers. I do not know the exact answer, but I want to share with you a Talmudic story that might shed light, and then we'll see how it ties with this week's portion. In the Talmud teaches us that actually the story appears in the Zohar, but it's also have to do with the Talmud. The Zohar tells us that there was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba lived in the 4th century. He was a great scholar and a very, very rich man. He did dealings with the Far East, and he was very successful financially. He lived in Israel, he moved to Israel later in his life with all his wealth. When he arrived in Israel, he went out and announced all over, anyone who wants to be rich should come and study Torah. And a lot of youngsters would come to study with him Torah and learn and discover Jewish tradition. There was one single man in his neighborhood by the name of Yossi. One day Yossi comes to the rabbi and he says to him, I want to study Torah to become rich. Why do I have to search for richness if I can have it by studying Torah? So Rabbi Abba turned to him and he says, sure, you come and study Torah, you will become very rich. What's your name? And the man said, my name is Yossi. And the rabbi says to his students, he went around in the campus where he established for studying, letting everyone know that there is a new student who arrived and they should all call him Yossi, the very wealthy man. That's how they should call him around. And that's what his name became in the campus, Yossi, the very wealthy man. Few months, few weeks go by, few months go by, 6 months go by, and the student goes to the rabbi, Rabbi Abba, and he says to him, Rabbi, where is the richness? I don't see any money. I didn't get a check. I didn't get cash, and there's no credit card. Nothing happened. Why are you saying that you promised me? Where is the promise delivered? The rabbi wanted to kick him out of yeshiva because he realized the reason he says anyone who wants to be rich, he actually meant it spiritual richness in the world to come. He meant as to lure them into the study of Torah. And here is this Yossi who is bothered by richness, and the only reason he came to study is to become wealthy. So he goes into his office thinking about how is he going to fire him and tell him, sorry, you're not meant for us. But suddenly he hears a heavenly voice, an echo comes from heaven saying to him, please do not let him go, even though his intention is not for the right reason. He is a very great potential and he will become a great leader. Let him stay. So the rabbi went in and tried to avoid the student. In the afternoon, a man knocks on the door of the campus asking for the dean. And he was directed to Rabbi Abba, and the rabbi turns to him and he says, how can I help you? And the man says to him, I want to make a business deal with you. The man takes out a golden, pure gold glass, a cup made out of gold. Now in Hebrew, I don't know about the English, I couldn't find it, I didn't have time. There is a word for gold, which is zahab, and there is a word for very pure, fine gold, the cleanest possible. Probably it's the 24 karat. It's called paz. Paz. Paz is not zahab. Zahab is gold. Maybe 14, 18 karat. 24 karat is paz. It's the finest, purest. And the man says to the rabbi, my father just died. He was very wealthy. He left me 13 cups of pure gold. And here is one of them. My father used to do a business agreement with a student of Torah where he will support the student and the student studying will accommodate for the businessman. He will have a share in the study. And the man says, I want to do the same as my father. My father inherited me a lot of money. I would like to support a student, make him very rich, have nothing to worry financially, as long as whatever he studies should be shared equally between me and him. And I want to start the business with a down payment of that gold cup. The rabbi realized right away that God had sent this man for Yossi, for the guy Yossi. So he called in, he summons Yossi into the office. He says, here is your money. This man is going to pay you as much as you ask. Just study Torah. And Yossi and this guy made an agreement where the man is going to give him a very nice, sizable gift every month. And the condition is whatever he studies will be divided equally between the student and the sponsor. And so it went on. And by the way, this is not started with this time. This was something that was done many years ago. The first one is Issachar and Zvulun, two of the tribes, where Zvulun would travel by sea to other country and make a good living. And he would support Issachar, and they shared the study of Torah among them. The problem is that Yossi, this man, after a while, he suddenly changed, a shift happened, and he started realizing that he made a bad deal because he would rather keep all the Torah to himself. So he started cry, sat down to cry, and the Rabbi Abba, turned to him and sees him crying. He asked him, why are you crying? And he told the rabbi, I made a bad deal. I lost so much of my world to come, reward in heaven, for money, gold and silver, which is no value compared to what I'm giving up. So the rabbi says to him, don't worry, we'll fix it. He calls the businessman back and he says to him, here back is your gold goblet. Here is your cup. The deal is off, but instead go and take the money that you are giving to this young man to orphans and widows, support them and help them. And I will share with you my study of Torah for the good deeds that you're doing, which is far greater than this student. And the man did it. Tell us the Zohar that this man's name now changed. He became known as Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi. Rabbi Yossi, Paz is the word for clean, fine gold, as I said, probably 24 karat, the purest gold possible. His name is Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi. He became the greatest, in his time, he became one of the greatest scholars, and his name appears everywhere in the Torah. Why was he named Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi? Because to remind everybody about the beginning of the way he connected to Judaism through the reward of the Paz, of the gold that he received. Asked the Rebbe, why was he named that way? By the way, his children also were known in the family name they took upon themselves as Ben Pazi, the son of Rabbi Yossi ben Pazi. Asked the Rebbe, after all, he rejected that goblet. So why was he named after that? In addition, by the time he became serious about studying of Torah, it had nothing to do with physical reward or the financial reward that he was receiving. So how come this name was stuck with him for the years to come and the next to the future generations? Says the Rebbe that the reason is to teach all of us that when you start the study of Torah, the beginning, you must study not for the right reason. It is 100% correct. In other words, the goal is for a person to study Torah for the sake of study Torah. However, it doesn't start that way. That's the way that it's never going to happen. We must find reasons that are not necessarily the best reasons, like Yossi, who studied Torah to become rich. But that is what brought the man to become a great leader, and that's why the name is stuck with him, so that we shouldn't be embarrassed to do it for a side reason, for not the reason that it sounds it should be. I think that this will help us understand what I started with. In our day and age, we think that the study of Torah started 3,330 years ago when God gave us a Torah, but it's not true. It started way earlier. From the moment there was a Jew around, there was studying. Abraham is the first Jew, and he already studied Torah. The Talmud tells us that he opened up a yeshiva to teach the 7 laws of Noah to the entire community. In fact, in this week's portion, we find something fascinating. We read about the birth of Isaac, and after Isaac is born, I'm going to chapter 21, verse 9, I'm sorry, verse 8, chapter 21, verse 8. It's the bottom of page 116 or 117 in English. We read the following. The child grew and was weaned at 24 months, and the day that Yitzchak was weaned, Abraham made a feast, inviting all the great people of the generation. We read about a great party that Abraham had made. Our sages are discussing what party did he make. I just read to you the Chumash, the Torah, with Rashi commentary. Rashi says when Yitzchak was weaned from feeding with his mother at the age of 24 months, Abraham made a big party. But the Medrash Rabbah, tells us that it was his bar mitzvah. At the age of 13 is when he made a party. However, the Medrash brings another reason, another time. The Medrash says that Abraham had completed writing a book about love and trust in God. And for the completion of writing a book about love and trust in God, he celebrated with his son Yitzchak. In other words, and that's why he brought all the people to celebrate with him. It's fascinating to know that books, writing books, studying books, wasn't something that started when God gave us a Torah. According to the Medrash, the first Jew was busy with writing books, and he celebrated the completion of writing a book about God. So I don't know the reason why the disproportion number of Jewish people who win and are recipients of the Nobel Prize, but definitely if there is something to be said from this week's portion is the fact that studying Torah, studying books, writing books is in the forefront of our life, and is ingrained in us in a way that is very unique. I want to move into a few other topics. The first one is, at the beginning of this week's portion, there is again, an unusual point that I think is interesting to share. In the beginning of this week's portion, we read that God appears to Abraham on the 3rd day after his circumcision. And the reason he appeared is to visit the sick and to cure Abraham. But later on, Abraham is feeding the 3 guests. And I'm sorry, there are 3 guests who came, one of them to tell Sarah that she's going to have a child. I want to read to you Sarah's reaction and ask a question. So we are on page 97, chapter 18, verse 9 and further. Chapter 18, verse 9, start the following. One angel said on behalf of God, I'm reading verse 9. They said to him, the angel said to Abraham, where is Sarah, your wife? He said, here in the tent. She's in the tent. One angel said on behalf of God, I will be returning to you at this time next year, and then your wife Sarah will have a son. He said to him, next year your wife will have a son. Sarah heard from the entrance of the tent, which was right behind the angel. The Torah continues, Sarah looking at her bodily organs, she's already 89 years old. Sarah laughed, saying, after I've withered, will I have a smooth skin? And my husband is old. God said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, is it really true that I will give birth? And Sarah denied it. I'm reading on chapter and verse 15. Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh because she was afraid. And he said, no, you did laugh. A rabbi is asking, what was wrong with Sarah's laughing? After all, Sarah did not hear it from God. She heard that from a man who looked like an Arab, a Bedouin, someone who was dressed with old clothes, someone who did not wash their feet for a long time and they came from far. That's how they looked like when they arrived. That's the Torah, that's the Medrash, that's the Talmud. So when a man comes to Abraham and says, hey, next year you're going to have a child, definitely she's going to laugh. It's a joke. And the rabbis explain that it comes to teach us how valued a blessing is. Even though this man looked like a stranger, even though the man was not godly, it didn't look that great, but when someone shares or tells you something of great, a blessing, you must right away answer Amen. You must right away say, oh, that's great, I wish the blessing will be granted, regardless of who says it. Even though here they did not look like God's angels, they look like men, like simple men, the fact that they gave a blessing should not be viewed as a joke, but rather should be cherished and accepted with open arms. And that's why God is complaining, why did she laugh? Don't take it so lightly. That's one point. One more point I want to share with you, and that is in the same story. I'm just going to show with you a very brief introduction to the point, and that is that in Judaism, God gave us many commandments. The commandments are divided into different types of activities. There are some commandments which we are required to do ourselves. No one can do them for us. For example, eating matzah on Passover, listening to the reading of the Megillah, praying, putting on tefillin for men. This is a mitzvah that no one can do it for me. I cannot appoint somebody. There is another mitzvah where I am obligated, but I can appoint somebody else to do. For example, study of Torah. As I shared with you before, you can hire someone to study on your behalf. You can send somebody to circumcise your son. There are many other mitzvot where teaching Torah to your children. There is a mitzvah to teach Veshinantam Levanecha. You can appoint someone to teach on your behalf. There are many other mitzvot. By the way, I can appoint someone to marry somebody. If I want to marry my wife, I can appoint someone to marry my wife on my behalf. And there is nothing wrong with that. The same is giving a get. It's a mitzvah to give a get when that's supposed to be done. And usually it should be done through an agent and not directly. There are mitzvot where it is preferred to be performed through a messenger, through somebody else. And one of them, as I shared with you, a get. Another one is Shalach Monas. On Purim, there is a mitzvah to give gifts of food to a friend. There is according to some, it is a prerequisite that it should be given through somebody else. Don't give someone a gift of food directly, and that's not the time and place now to discuss the reasons. The Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitch Rebbe, wrote Code of Law. In 3 places, he writes that there is a greater mitzvah to do it yourself, to perform the mitzvah yourself than to appoint others. And one is the preparation for Shabbat. The Talmud tells us that great sages would stop studying Torah on Friday afternoon. They would polish their own shoes. They will cook their own fish. They would go fishing for Shabbat. They would prepare the table for Shabbat. it is a greater mitzvah when it's performed by the man himself. Another one is to check for chametz for before Passover, and the third one is baking matzah. There's a greater mitzvah do it in ourselves. Today it's very, very unlikely for us because we don't have a matzah bakery. But what's interesting in this week's portion, when it comes to feeding the guests, we find that Abraham wanted to perform the mitzvah himself partially. When it comes to water, when it comes to providing them water first, it says yukachna me'at mayim. Yukach in Hebrew means they will be brought down to you, because he was appointing a servant to give them water. The next verse, verse 5, says, verse 5 in chapter 18 says, ve'ekcha pat lechem, not yukach. Ve'ekcha in Hebrew means, and I will provide you with a loaf of bread. Now he wants to do it himself. But there is another point to be said. Before, I want to share with you that right away we read, Ve'ela bakar ratz Abraham ran to catch a young goat, to slaughter it and serve them. So he did it himself. The Torah tells us whatever Abraham did himself for others, God did himself to his children. Whatever Abraham did to an agent, God did, but to an agent, and it caused a lot of strife. When it comes to manna, for the Jewish people living in Egypt, the manna was given to the Jewish people directly without any intermediary. The manna would land every morning, the quail would land every morning, and they would find it. The quail was in the afternoon, they would find it directly. However, water had to come through Moses. Every time they ran out of water, Moses had to talk or hit a rock or dig a well. There was always something that he had to do. And because of that, there was a lot of punishments to Jewish people for complaining about water. And Moshe Rabbeinu did not merit to enter the Holy Land because of water. Tell us the Talmud, it's because Abraham offered water to an agent. That's why God offered water to an agent. Abraham wanted to give the bread and the meat himself. So God provided manna and quail himself. However, when we look at it, the actual delivery, the serving of the guest, it says, Vaiten el anar, Vaiten el anar, Vaimaer la'asot oto, verse 7. Vaiten el anar means he gave it to the lad. He gave it to Ishmael to serve the guests. What happened here? If he wanted to do himself, how come he's giving it to Ishmael to deliver? And the sages tell us that Abraham was concerned about educating and bringing up his own son. He wanted to raise him in the proper way by making him help serve the guests. And that's why it's still counted as if he did it himself. Because when you take your children and you say to them, come, let's participate in the mitzvah, let's do it together, it is counted as if you did it yourself. So even though serving the guest is greater than when we do it ourselves rather than appointing someone on our behalf, and every time Abraham did it himself, God rewarded the Jewish people, his children, later on in a very unique way. When Abraham included Ishmael, his son, to participate in the mitzvah, it did not diminish from any of it, but rather it kept it in the same level. And that would be the end of the conclusion of our study today. I hope that you were able to learn, and I also want to share with you that tomorrow, a Saturday night, we're going to have a